Hello and welcome to the Essence of You podcast. I am your host, Steph Localani, and I am here with the wonderful person, Art Burns, who we just met, and we are here to talk about him and his nonprofit called Alicia's Angels. And I've got a short little bio here. Art Burns is the founder and executive director of Alicia's Angels, Inc., which is a nonprofit serving cancer patients, their family members, and professional caregivers. So let's just dive in. I want to know what inspired you to create this organization, because you said it just started in January.
Yes. We first, got our nonprofit status, our tax exempt status with the IRS in January. But really, this whole thing started probably about 3 or 4 years ago when I started working with a woman whose name is Alicia. For about 9 years now, I've been a professional certified mindfulness meditation teacher. And over the course of these 8 or 9 years, I've worked with a lot of people with stress. And within that larger group of people who, experience chronic stress, I came across many people who were cancer patients, in various stages of diagnosis, treatment, recovery, and in one case, a terminal patient named Alicia. Alicia has and she's given me permission to talk about this a little bit. She has a hormone-fed breast cancer, which is it's certainly fatal, terminal, but it's her diagnosis and the prognosis is that she could live with this for 20 years or more, or maybe even 30 years, or she could wake up tomorrow and feel a pain in her side and the doctor's going to tell her she has 6 months left. And so when Alicia's still here with us, I see her all the time. But when Alicia and I first started working with each other, it's completely understandable, of course, that, her emotional experience was so severe, so powerful. Yes, there's a lot of anger. Yes, there's a lot of, fear and worry, but all of it was just so intense, and it created this sort of, energy or this sort of, state within her that was, number one, certainly not beneficial to her condition in any way. I mean, that's a big part of working with cancer patients is that, when we reduce the stress, we enhance your body's ability to not only, respond to treatment, but also to, manage your experience moment by moment. And for Alicia, this was a really, really tall order. Again, living with that kind of prognosis, I think any of us in that situation would be the same way. And it was really, really powerful. And so anyway, Alicia and I started, when I say that I'm a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, I mean, that's the title, but a lot of what I do in my training and work with people it also includes a lot of loving kindness training, right? And so the ability to, show up with an equanimity, right? And there's one side of our lives that's sort of an internal, intrapersonal experience, right? That's just how we process everything that we're feeling and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the interpersonal, right? And, when we're at the grocery store and we see somebody and toxic masculinity kind of thing, that can send somebody, really into a really kind of difficult place. And the thing about interpersonal experiences is that we don't have to be with someone else to be having an interpersonal experience. If I'm sitting here and I think of somebody with whom I have some kind of conflict, my body's going to respond as though they're right here bothering me, And so anyway, so Alicia and I, after about, a couple of months, no more than a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I saw such a shift in Alicia and her ability to, we throw around words like acceptance and tolerance and things like this. But when you see somebody who just really has a basic shift in the way that they do show up with tolerance and with equanimity, it's so inspiring. And I saw this happen with Alicia. And at one point she said during one of our meetings, she said, this work is giving me, I think she said, it's kind of giving me permission to have a beautiful death. Not that she was striving for it, not that she wanted it or anything, but it was, so it wasn't like a fatalistic, nihilistic kind of thing, but it was this, she was in touch with herself, and she was, ready to experience with full consciousness and with full, awakeness and awareness what she's going through. And today you wouldn't even recognize her. You would not even recognize, I don't even recognize that first person that I talked to. And so seeing this shift in Alicia, it just inspired me. And I just knew right then and there, I was like, this is what I need to do. And so Alicia's Angels was born. So Alicia's Angels is a nonprofit where we get our funding from grants and donors. And I go to chemotherapy infusion centers and conduct mindfulness meditation, give guided meditations, give, some coaching in terms of, self-compassion, loving kindness, all the kinds of stuff that's going to help somebody in what is the most difficult situation, right? I mean, there's, even people who are not, don't receive a terminal diagnosis or prognosis, there's still so much there. There's still so much that just makes it so hard, and so what most of our healthcare system focuses on with cancer patients is, of course, the medication and trying to, make their bodies better. But there's very little attention paid to the emotional and even the spiritual part of that experience. And so that's where Alicia's Angels, that's the sort of space that Alicia's Angels fills. And so again, we do that with on-site chemo, in the chemotherapy infusion centers, but we also hold Zoom meetings where, anybody can show up from anywhere in the world. And it's basically a 90-minute session where we do about 30 minutes of guided meditation, followed by 30 minutes of just sort of, again, like a coaching sort of lecture, like this is how self-compassion works, this is how acceptance works, these kind of things. And then 30 minutes or so of just community, like, hey, we're all here together, let's talk, and so, and the dream, as you said in the bio, the dream is that we get the patient, their family members, and their caregivers all in the same place, because they're all having the same experience together with that same cancer diagnosis. I know I'm going on and on and on, so I'll pause.
I love this. No, I absolutely love this. And I like, too, that you open it up to the whole family. I've known quite a few people who have gone through cancer, and it doesn't just affect them. It affects the entire family, and on very different levels. And not everyone is equipped to deal with it. And so I love that mindfulness aspect, like it in life in general. But then when you apply it to what people are going through with cancer, that's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's the most rewarding thing I've ever been involved with, for sure. And like you're saying though, like it's, again, yes, a cancer diagnosis impacts the rest of the family too. And we can think of that in two different ways, right? We can think of that as, how the family member is coping with the prognosis and the process and all that kind of stuff is their experience. But then it's the way they are sort of behaving and speaking, and the language that they use or the language they don't use also has an impact on the patient. Like, for example, one of the most common things is that family members just avoid the word cancer. Like, we can't say, like they'll be in the middle of a sentence, like, try to change the word somehow, because they're avoiding it, out of the wonderful love of their heart. They're trying not to upset the patient, but that makes the patient feel less like a human and more like a patient, right? And so getting the cancer patient's humanity and dignity and self, their sense of self back is a huge part of it. And and lots of studies have shown that this is enormously, powerful and influential in wherever it's going to go, right? Whether somebody's going to recover, somebody's not going to recover, and even if somebody, is on a terminal path, we can talk about what's the quality of these last few months that they have, and these, it's very, very little stuff, but it makes a huge difference, So anyway, I think we understand.
Absolutely. I love all of this. And it makes me think of, so not a few years ago, it's been a while now, I've lost 2 high school classmates to cancer that I know of. And they were young. One of them was in his early 30s, I believe, and the other one was just barely 30. And we weren't close or anything, but then you hear about these cancer diagnoses, and even as a buddy from high school, it affects you. And so for one of those friends, his name is Tom, and I wrote a feature-length film, not about Tom, but about how the friends reacted to this cancer diagnosis and losing Tom. And I feel like I approached it pretty well, but at the same time, I didn't do much study in it. The film was more about how each of the characters were reacting to the death, and then also how they were dealing with their own lives in general as well. Like, one was a mom who was so she needed everything in her life to be absolutely perfect, and that's what she was striving for. And in turn, that was affecting her marriage. And that, it had a bit to do with losing their best friend, Tom, but not everything. But anyway, so cancer affects people on so many different levels. And I'd like to know, what have you seen with some of the family members? What are the different ways that it affects them?
That's a great question, and you're speaking again, when you're talking about that woman who was a mother, and, it impacts, like I was saying a minute ago, it impacts the family members in 2 different ways, right? It's their, especially when you talk about, a mother, right, whose, son or daughter is going through this, that is absolutely, as somebody who's a parent myself, I'm starting to tear up just even thinking about what that must be like to watch your child suffer like that, and how hurt and how, how deeply painful that can be, and how difficult. And it's not something that it doesn't just go away. It's you're crying while you're doing the laundry. You're crying while you're cooking pasta. You're crying while you're driving to the chemo center. It's pervasive, and it's all the time. But again, now that's the parent's experience, right? Which then impacts how they talk to their spouse, how they interact with their child who has the cancer, how they interact with their children who don't have the cancer, how they interact with their friends, how they interact at work, how, it's everywhere. And then, of course, there's that connection that the people who, the other kids in the family, or the friends, or the coworkers, or whatever, they're further impacted by the way the mother or the father is interacting with them, and so it's all a deeply, deeply interconnected experience that we're all having. And mindfulness is about awareness, right? And so it's about, one of the things that I do in the thing that I provide for that predicament is the awareness to not only recognize and not only, because I'm sorry to bounce around like this a little bit, but one of the answers that a lot of parents have for that is, I'm just going to stuff it down. I'm just going to be strong, and I'm just going to shove it into the closet and just move on with my life. I'm just going to do life, and then you're squeezing a melon in the supermarket and you break down, and there's no getting away from it. It's like trying to run away from your shadow. Right. And so again, one of the things that mindfulness is so helpful, especially with family members, as you're asking about, is that it brings that awareness, that not only the awareness of this isn't just your experience, or it isn't just your son or daughters or friends or colleague or whatever's experience. But it's also, it's about giving yourself permission to feel what you're feeling, and a lot of times, and it's really quite fascinating when you're asking that question of, what do I see? It's like I see the same thing that I see in the patient, right? Which is that, in a lot of ways, there's like self-blame. Like, it's my fault that I have cancer. If I hadn't pushed myself so hard when I was in my 20s, or if I had eaten better, or if I had paid more attention to my health, right? Well, the parent is thinking the same thing. If only I had done this, or what could I have done differently, or how could I have, what impact did I have on all this? And, I like to say to people that, it's one thing to sit here and feel good right now. And there's lots of people who come into a chemotherapy infusion center and do Reiki or do, cosmetic work and lots of stuff to make somebody feel better right here, right now. What I do is most effective at 2:30 in the morning while you're wide awake, staring at the ceiling, and all these thoughts are coming through. Because that's when it can become, devastating. And that's when, we need the tools of things like mindfulness, loving kindness, and self-compassion, which is what, we do in Alicia's Angels. So, does that all make sense? I know I'm bouncing around a little bit. I get so excited talking about this.
I can tell you have such a passion for this. And yes, it is making sense. I have so many questions. I want to stay on this path for a second, and then I want to move to a different path. But my question, so let's say that we're kind of distant friends from, maybe not distant, we're friends with someone who was just diagnosed with cancer. Is there something we could say or do to show that we're supporting without being overbearing? So some things I've read, if someone has cancer, you're like, ooh, let me make you food. Cool. But is that what they need? So then how should we approach this?
That's such a very, very beautiful and important question. Thank you so much for that. Honestly, and you're right. The first thing that comes to mind is, what can I do? Can I make you a container of soup? Can I come and take your dog for a walk? And all that is very, very wonderful. And I'm not suggesting for a second that we should ever not do those kind of things. However, what the cancer patients, in my experience, what I have found is what they need and what they truly, truly desire is two things. Number one is honesty, right? They really want people to be honest with them. They want people to be themselves around them. They don't want people to be tiptoeing and like, oh, you fragile little being here, let me do everything I can do to help you. It's like, it comes across as pity and sympathy at that point, which is not a flattering feeling. It's not something that's necessarily even helpful. And so in addition to the honesty, they just want your presence. They want your active listening. They want your compassion. They want your attention. And so what I tell people, first and foremost, just start by listening. Don't worry about what you're going to say. Because even in that process of what do I say? What do I say? What do I say? You're moving yourself away from your own heart, and your whatever comes out is going to feel like canned and disingenuous. Whereas if we just sit and connect and start by just listening, then whatever arises is usually the right thing. It's like, and who knows what that is, but it's almost like you can't say the wrong thing at that point if you're coming from that place of connection on the level of the heart.
I love that. Yeah. And it's so important to do that active listening and be there. I have a friend who she just finished chemo. She's been going through it for about a year with breast cancer. And we've been hanging out more because what I'm understanding from her is that she needs a friend. She doesn't need me to like, as you suggested, walk her dogs. She's got 2 doggies. She's fine walking them on her own. She's got her wife to help her. But then like being there and hanging out. And even one day I randomly called her and I was like, hey, I'm like 5 minutes away. Can I come over? And for a few days after that, she just kept texting and saying, thank you for showing up. Just randomly out of the blue, you came. And I was like, okay, that's not a normal thing for me. Trust me, but that was a lot of fun.
Exactly. That's really beautiful.
So then my question to you is, how did you get on the path of practicing mindfulness? Because we talked about starting Alicia's Angels, but yeah, how about this mindfulness practice? How'd you get there?
Thank you for asking that question. Again, I don't like to, in all my work, and I think this is part of what happens when we practice mindfulness and we build the skills of mindfulness. Mostly I'm trying to get myself out of the way of the whole process, but I do appreciate you asking about me and allowing me to tell you a little bit about my story. And the truth is that, first of all, if you met me like 12 years ago or something, you would not recognize me. I was not this person, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. Back in the day, I grew up in the New York City advertising community. So if you remember the show Mad Men, I was like the late 90s, 2000s version of that, right? Where, and believe me, there are certain things about that show that were so accurate. And one of them was how much drinking and how much, by the 90s and 2000s, it was like all kinds of cocaine and all kinds of just absolute insanity. And that life nearly killed me. It really did. I later discovered that I was an alcoholic. I have now almost 15 years sober. It literally, awesome. Again, just in every, thank you, but in every way, it almost destroyed me. And so when I left that industry, I thought I was doing something wise by opening a small business in the form of a little cafe that was near where I was living so I could be with my newborn daughter. And that was like, in the terms of stress, it was like going from the frying pan into the fire. And that drove me to a place of like severe burnout and just really, really just a hot mess. And one day, somebody suggested to me that, you should read a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn and check out mindfulness. And I went straight from that person saying that, went to the bookstore, didn't actually find a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn at that bookstore, but found a Thich Nhat Hanh book. And it changed everything. And just like, again, the idea of acceptance and just, like the ability to just be, this is what is, and I don't have to make it what I want it to be. I can work with what is. And that simple shift was enough to like, it's like, I feel like I just got on a ride at an amusement park and I'm still on it. I'm still loving it, 12, 15 years later. So that was the start of my practicing mindfulness. And then what I realized is that, one of the very first, I'm not necessarily a practicing Buddhist or Hinduist, but I'm very, because mindfulness kind of comes from Buddhism and Hinduism, it's definitely, I've done a lot of research and definitely like kind of checked it out and stuff. And one of the very original teaching of the Buddha is that all human suffering arises from the delusion of separateness, right? And so when I figured out how to not be lost in that delusion of separateness, now that's not to say that there is no separateness, right? Like, I'm me, you're you, you have your home, your cats, your dogs, your whatever, I have mine, but at the same time, there's a part of us that is not separate. There's a part of us that is very much having the same human experience. And part of, our experience is, not only the same, but it is deeply, deeply connected with each other. Even just the words that you and I are speaking right now are going to impact everything that happens for the rest of the day here and maybe for the rest of our lives in some ways, and once I realized, again, between the acceptance and sort of letting go and being present, and then that aspect, which all comes from like the loving kindness part of this work, it was like somebody gave me the cheat code for life. And it was like, wow, I can actually be happy, like it's okay to be happy. And it doesn't, believe me, I do not make nearly as much money as a mindfulness teacher as I did as an advertising executive, and so it's not about like, oh, everything's great in my life because I have this beautiful home or this stuff in my life. I actually have very little in my life, but I've never been happier than, I'm much, much happier now than when I had all the stuff, like I had all the gadgets and the fancy cars and all that kind of stuff and the fancy clothes and everything. I don't have any of that anymore, but I am happy now. And that's the power of what this stuff is. So thank you again for asking that question.
Yes. And that is the power of it. So I've been reading about mindfulness for years, but not really practicing it. Reading, not totally understanding. And then earlier this year, I started yoga teacher training, and I'm learning like the things that you've just talked about, which is we're all connected. We're all breathing the same breath. I went to a yoga class last night. I'd never been to this one. And it's just this guy, not too far from my house. He does it in his yard. My friends invited me. And it was like 15 to 20 of us out in this guy's front yard. Cars are driving by, kids are running, people are walking their dogs, and we're doing yoga in the yard. And that is an act of mindfulness as well. And it was so beautiful. And I walked away from that just feeling even more fulfilled than I'd felt earlier in the day. And it's all because it's all connected, and it's our bodies and our minds and our hearts moving and acting together.
Right. Exactly. It's so beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. And I'd like to know, I want to go back to Alicia's angels and the people that you help. You've had a profound change in your life with the mindfulness work that you do. Have you noticed this happening with the cancer patients that you help and even their families, that they have like this profound awakening and shift in their lives?
Absolutely. Because we're still pretty early in the game here. I've seen it less in the family members and more in the patients with whom I've worked directly. But this is what I was trying to explain about Alicia herself. Like, when I say you wouldn't recognize her, I mean you would not recognize her. Like, she's like a different person. Like, she is like, like where were you keeping this person that whole time that we were, when we were first talking, and that shift is exactly what we're talking about here, right? She's and I don't mean to just focus in on one person, because this is common to everyone with whom I've worked who's been on the cancer journey, which is that, again, it's like just that introduction of you're not just this separate being that you think you are, right? And when I get somebody to buy into that, it's like, it's just like you feel the whole weight of everything. Just, you can see it in them. Like, you can see just this big exhale and just this relaxing into the now. This is what is. And yeah, so you're the one with cancer. Okay. And I'm the one with stress. Okay. I'm the one with gray hair. You're the one with no hair. Great. Like, that's just one part of what we are. And when we can get in touch with what's behind that and above that and all around that, again, it gives even the cancer patient then gets permission, in a sense, to be happy, even though they have cancer, which is a big part of it. It's like we get so wrapped up in the roles we play, and this happens to everybody, not just cancer patients, right? But a cancer patient is such a role, right? It's almost like somebody who's in a terrible accident in which they come partially or fully paralyzed, right? Like that role is like everybody knows the role you're playing, right? And as long as you know the role you're playing, then you can step out of that role or integrate that role into everything else that you are. And that's when, again, at 2:30 in the morning, when the mind starts thinking of things this way, that moment at 2:30 in the morning can actually turn into a really beautiful and magical experience for someone, because they're getting in touch with this rather than, oh, I'm the cancer patient and my life is terrible and it's all my fault, and, all this stuff, and again, it becomes like this cycle, right? It's like the more I'm down from it and the more I'm woe is me and my separate experience and all that, the more that becomes a bigger, louder story that I can't ignore. I can't not ignore it, but I can't get past it. I can't break free from it. And so that's what I help people to do mostly, is to break free from that story.
That is so beautiful. And I've seen that my dad has had cancer. And I say it that way because he doesn't talk to me about his journey at all. I actually didn't find out that he was going in for surgery. It's prostate cancer until the day before. And it was through a text. And the text was a family group text. Apparently, I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and apparently everybody knew except me. And the text said, actually, it was a canceled appointment. The text said, we had to cancel the appointment because your dad has COVID, so we're going to try to go back in January. I'm like, wait, hold up. What appointment? What are we talking about? And it turns out it's prostate cancer. He went, I believe, it was rescheduled for earlier this year, and he went, but they didn't tell me when that would happen. And I felt compelled one night to call my dad. They're like this push, call your dad. So I called my dad and I was like, hey, Dad, how's it going? I know that you had to cancel your appointment. What's going on? I haven't heard anything. And he was like, oh, I'm going in tomorrow. And I was like, great. So that's good that you're going in. And he opted for the surgery rather than chemo. And then within a day of the surgery, I called and I asked how he was doing. And he's a different person in that cancer has consumed his identity now. So to relate to what you were saying just previously is that it becomes your identity. And so I think I know the answer. Actually, I do know the answer, but I'm going to ask you so that other people can hear the answer, is now that as far as I'm aware, the cancer's been removed. And so same with my friend with the breast cancer, the chemo, the cancer's gone. So now they're cancer-free, and this mindfulness practice can help them now, I imagine, because they're still walking through life with, I had cancer, or I have it, and it could come back. And so, yeah, my question is, does mindfulness help them after as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's again, relates right back to the same thing, is that, it's like that story, that role, however you want to look at it, right? It's like, okay, so if cancer became your entire identity, what happens when you're cancer free? Did you just lose your, like, who are you now? And that's where, mindfulness helps again to, it's not in the same way that I was talking before about the fact that we are separate, differentiated people on one realm or one level, but we're also something else. So yes, it's true. The cancer patient is a cancer patient. That is part of who they are now. And it always will be, because almost any form of cancer, there's very few doctors who will say, okay, you don't have to ever worry about it coming back. That's just not reality, and so,
yeah.
And so it's like, okay, it's like taking that part of you, and instead of making that the whole thing, it's instead part of an entire constellation that makes you. And, and again, like, part of that is cancer, and that will always be part of it. But you could also, in your post-cancer life, you could learn to do something you've never done before. You could learn to be a juggler, and all of a sudden juggling, chainsaws. Does that mean you're only a chainsaw juggler? No, of course not. It's just, it's part of the entire tapestry of who you are. And that's, again, the reason why mindfulness helps with that is because it opens our whole awareness to all of that. It lets us, zoom out and see more of the big picture, more of the entire picture.
That is so beautiful. And yeah, like I said, I thought I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from you. But yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And I know that I'm going to call my dad, and I want to talk to him and ask him how he's really doing. Because the last time I called, he was watching. So he's got the phone on. He was doing FaceTime with me. And then right beyond the phone, he was watching some football game or soccer game or something like that. And, 5 minutes in, I was like, Dad, I'm going to let you go. We can talk later. If that game is so important, I'm going to let you watch that game. But yeah, I really want to know how he's doing, because he doesn't talk to me about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now that's a really interesting space that you're in there, right? And that's getting back to what we were talking about before in terms of the family. There's this really, strange and difficult thing to manage when we're doing this work. And you, even as I know you're, studying to be a yoga instructor, right? Or are a yoga. I'm sorry if I got that fact wrong, but
no,
but
you're right. It's studying.
Okay, cool. You're always going to be studying, just like I am. There's a meme that goes around on Facebook once in a while about a 94-year-old cellist who's asked, "Why do you keep practicing? You're 94 years old." He's a virtuoso. He says, "Because I think I'm making progress." And the fact is that
I love that.
Right? We never stop. We're always in a state of development throughout our entire lifetimes. And so anyway, one of the really difficult things for a family member, or even as a yoga teacher or a mindfulness meditation teacher, as a yoga teacher, part of what you're trying to do is to reduce suffering. You're giving people a tool to help them reduce their suffering, right? Same thing that I'm doing with the work I do. But here's the thing. I have no moral right to make somebody, suffer less.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is their journey.
Yes.
Right? And so when we're talking to somebody like your dad, he's doing things the way he's doing them. Now, and this is where we get back to, like, what can we actually provide for a family member? And it really comes down to the most important thing, and really the only thing we can ever effectively do is provide our presence that is in the absence of any judgment or any, clinging to an outcome or an expectation. And in that space, they then have the freedom to buy in or not buy in, or to reduce their suffering or not reduce their suffering. So it's like we're providing that option in a sense, rather than saying, okay, this is what you have to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It's a big one.
That is a big one. And that is a beautiful way to provide not options, but just like, don't push. Go in and be there. Be that listener.
Right. Most of us, I'm going to tell you something I'm sure you already know, but in case anybody out there doesn't, most of us, we listen to reply, right? We listen to give our input, right? And sometimes that's because we want the other person to see how smart we are. Sometimes it's because we want the other person. Sometimes it's because we want the other person to know how much we care, but whatever that thing is, as we're trying to, as we're listening to respond, we're disconnecting, right? We're not fully there. with them. And so active listening means to listen to understand, right? Rather than listen to respond. And when somebody feels that you are trying to understand them, that is way more powerful than anything you could possibly say or do for that person. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh.
It really is.
It is. And Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, used to say that love and understanding are not two separate concepts or you know, experiences. They are the same thing. You know, I whenever I say this, I always bring up this off-Broadway play that was running in New York in like the 90s or 2000s called I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change. Right? And that's the way most of us see loving relationships. It's like I want you to be the way I want you to be. But that's not love. Right? Love, you know, even if we love a flower, right? Like we're not asking that flower, like we're not saying, oh man, if only that one petal was a little bit different, you know, then I could really love this flower. No, we love the flower for what it is. And when we can start equating love with that, you know, that energy of understanding, which includes a connection. Like in order for me to understand you, I have to feel a connection to you. I have to be here with you. And again, that is the thing that the person is going to feel. It's not that they're going to understand it. It's not something you're going to say or do that makes it different. It's something they are going to feel. And it's going to feel really, really wonderful to them. And that's when somebody feels really cared for. And that's when things really change, you know? So anyway, I hope I didn't go off on too much of a tangent there.
No, that was great. I love how you equated it to a flower as well, because you're right. Like we could look at a flower or a tree or anything in our environment and wish it was one way. It would never will be. That tree will always be a pine tree and it will always drop stuff on my car. There is nothing I can do about that except maybe park my car somewhere else.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But it's the same thing, you know, when you're mentioning something on like sort of the negative side of it, but it's also true on the positive side. Like, you know, when we look at a sunset, you know, nobody ever looks at a sunset and says, oh, if only that one cloud wasn't there, then this would be a really beautiful sunset. It's like, wow, look at this sunset. It's like, it's indescribable. Like words can't meet it. You know, it's just, wow, you know, and really every moment of our lives can be that. Every person, every interaction we have can be that same, wow, you know, you are a beautiful human being and I get to be with you for just even, and I'm talking about even like the checkout person at the grocery store, you know, like it's always available to us. And that's really what changed with Alicia. Once I taught her the methods to develop this for herself, which again are mindfulness, loving kindness, and self-compassion. It's just like an equation that just kind of equals this ability to really, you know, to look at someone and see, you know, it's almost like you're seeing yourself in them, right? Because what you're seeing the humanity in them. But you cannot do that if you're like, you know, either lost on your phone or lost in like, oh, what does this person think of me? Or oh man, I got to say something smart now. Right? Like if you're in that space, you cannot be in the space that we're discussing here. And so that's why it always comes down to presence and presence without that judging and desirous attached, you know, expectation, you know. Ram Dass talked about this a lot where, you know, and I have found this to be really, a really beautiful reminder, you know, that person on the other side of the counter at the store, right? Or even the person who cuts me off in traffic and makes me really upset, or the family member who keeps something from me, or whatever it is, anything that I interact with, Ram Dass would call it, that's God in drag. That person who just made you angry is God in drag.
I want to read the quote on your website from Alicia. She says, I wanted my experience of the thoughts and fears about my morality to not be full of anger and fear. I had so much anger about my situation. I hid it. I tried all the things one tries, but the softer way was what worked. Compassion for self, alignment with what is. It is possible. I think that is just so beautiful. I imagine that a lot of people, one of the first emotions that they feel is anger. And because you had mentioned before, people are saying, I should have done this, I should have done that, maybe had I done this. And so I like in her quote that she went from anger to basically to love.
Right, exactly. Whereas, she talks about the softness, right, which is, anger is a hardness, right? Anger is embattlement with everything around us, right? Whereas love is the softness, right? Love is what, again, if we, back to what Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, that love and understanding are the same thing. It's not something that I'm outwardly projecting. It's something that I'm opening to take in, right? And that's soft. I was just going to say one last thing about because she talks about compassion for self, right? Like, and this is something, again, like you asked, like there's actually a really wonderful book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a very famous book called On Death and Dying, where she interviewed people in, terminal, hospitals and stuff, terminal wards of hospitals and stuff like that, hospice and the like. And she identified like 5 stages that everybody goes through. And certainly anger is absolutely that first one, denial and you get into like the bargaining, like, man, if I do this, maybe it'll be okay. And ultimately the last stage of this whole process is acceptance. And so the reason I put those two things together is because, for most people, and this is beyond even just cancer patients, most people, and this is borne out in research as well as just the intuitive, heart that tells us this, but most people, deny their own suffering, right? It's like, it feels like an embarrassment somehow. It feels like, like it's not okay for me to suffer. It's not okay for me to be challenged right now. It's not okay for me to not be okay. And that is one of the biggest steps. And I'm talking not just for cancer patients, for everyone. The ability to just pause for a moment and say, this is really hard for me right now. I am struggling. And that alone, and then the next step of that, in the self-compassion practice, which this is derived from a beautiful, wonderful scientist and psychologist named Kristen Neff, Dr. Kristen Neff, does enormous work on mindfulness and self-compassion, and definitely look her up. She's amazing videos, amazing book. But anyway, she has this sort of 3-step process that I've been taken inspiration and sort of adapted into the work that I do. I always credit her with the inspiration, but essentially the process is as follows. Like, that first step is to be able to say, wait a minute, no, this is hard for me, right? I'm not going to just deny it. I'm not going to just keep going through what I got to go through and just, hope it all works out, whatever. I can stop just for a moment and say, this is difficult. I am suffering right now. And then the next step is to say, I am not suffering alone right now, right? So for a cancer patient, that becomes relatively, easy to access, because we can look up how many millions of other people right here, right now, have the same exact cancer as you do. Now, that's not to say, hey, everybody's got it tough, so suck it up, buttercup. It's the opposite of that. It's that feeling of connection. I am having the same experience as all these other people. And usually, even at this point of the explanation, people are like, oh my God, that feels so different. And then the next step is, how do we comfort ourselves? How do we talk to ourselves in that moment? How do we even, give ourselves a little hug, hold our hand, put a hand on our cheek like we would a little child who's struggling with something, And when we can learn to do that, it becomes like a superpower. Like nothing can ever really throw me off anymore, right? Because anytime I start suffering, I can do this, right? So it's not like some kind of like game where either I won or I lost. Oh, I guess I'm suffering in this, I'm a loser. I'm the sucker here or something like that, because that's the way most people see it. And so again, that's, really what I do. Again, I try to get myself out of the way of all of this. And it's not about like what I'm necessarily, yes, I pride myself on being able to communicate this stuff very well, but really it's just about teaching them how to do the practices, how to, it's developing tools. And that's it's a personal and beautiful journey that one goes through as they develop that. And so most of the stuff that, like all that stuff that Alicia said in that quote, that's from her. I didn't, that's not something she learned from me, right? It's like she learned the practices from me, and the practices are what brought her to that beautiful quote.
And I like that it's called a practice because you practice it every single day. It's not just, I learned how to, get through this with mindfulness. And so boom, every single day. It's a practice. It's remembering all these things. And that's something I have to work on daily. And then if I make a mistake, don't beat yourself up about it. It's a practice. You're practicing.
For all the people out there, yes, it is a practice. And yes, for a period of time, we have to intentionally do that practice every day. But the beautiful thing that happens here, because of a quality of our brain called neuroplasticity, right? The more we do that practice every day, after like a few months, it becomes, I'm doing the practice without doing the practice, right? Like I'm not trying anymore. It's just like who I've become in a sense. And so every moment of every day I'm practicing, but I'm not like doing anything. I'm just being something. I'm being me, and me is more present and more connected and more accepting and more equanimous and more compassionate to myself and to everybody else. And then it just becomes a feedback loop, right? Like I say, like I have the most amazing, spiritual experiences at 7-Eleven, like when I'm getting gas, like it's like, at every moment this is available to us.
It truly is. And you said neuroplasticity. And one of the things you wrote to me, you said you can get pretty nerdy on the neuroscience. So let's get nerdy. We have a couple more minutes.
I thought you'd never ask.
Yes. So tell me about that. I've been learning a little bit myself, just to, kind of like on the fringes, but I know that we can rewire our brains through work. And so tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, there was a landmark study done about maybe 20 years ago that found that, they did brain scans on people, who had never practiced meditation before. And, they took a brain scan every week or whatever it was. I don't remember the details. It's been so long. But essentially, the bottom line is that after 8 weeks of people doing 20 minutes a day, they were able to see on brain scans how their brain was working differently. And the areas that were active and receiving the blood and the oxygen were the areas like the prefrontal cortex and as opposed to the limbic area where we are able to access compassion and love and intention and presence. And it just, again, it's not like, and the key point of this is that this neuroplasticity was seen when people weren't meditating, right? It's not just to say that, when you're in that space of meditation or doing meditation, that's what your brain looks like. It's just, that's what you become. One of the original teachers and somebody I consider just a mentor and an inspiration to me is Dan Siegel, who's a very famous interpersonal neurobiologist, and he has a beautiful way of explaining this. There's a lot of acronyms and rhymes and stuff like that, which really helpful for remembering things. But he basically describes it as follows, that when you go and you do meditation, right, or if you practice loving kindness or do yoga, right, you are entering into a state. That state could be called presence, it could be called calm, it could be called connection, it could be called accepting, whatever we want to describe that state. That's where you are when you're doing that practice. As you continue to do that practice regularly and invest in it, invest your emotion and your attention into it, that state becomes a trait. It just becomes who you are. And what's really beautiful about that is that now you're showing up to every moment, every experience, every circumstance of your life as this different, sort of energy, let's call it, right? And that energy is now going to produce different responses from people, right? And a different it changes the whole thing. And then what you're experiencing now from those people becomes different. And, it just kind of creates its own momentum, its own sort of gravitational field, if you want, or like a force to it. And that's when it becomes really, really beautiful. And for that reason, when I teach people mindfulness meditation, yes, I always teach people how to do a formal meditation, because there's no substitution for sitting and closing your eyes and just doing meditation. But what I really focus on is, informal practices. Like the first thing, if you were my client, the first thing I would teach you is when you're brushing your teeth, and this is something all of you should, this is the first practice I teach every single one of my clients, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, or a cancer patient, right? That while you're brushing your teeth, listen to the sound that you're making as you brush your teeth. And when you find that you're thinking about, that meeting I have this afternoon, or what am I going to wear today, or whatever, as soon as you realize that you're thinking about something, you can't be thinking about something and listening to something at the same time, you just go back to listening. And over and over and over, twice a day, you're brushing your teeth. And if, by the end of a few weeks, it's like, oh my gosh, like even just doing that can create the kind of impact that we're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to be doing that when I brush my teeth from now on.
Please do. Please do. When we're doing guided meditation or any form of meditation, and I'm sure it's very much the same with yoga, that, it's meditation is about, let me tell a personal story. So when I teach people meditation, invariably they come back to me after a few weeks and they say, Art, last week I had this meditation where my mind was so clear and so present and so tranquil. It was magical. But then the next day I did my meditation and my mind was bouncing all over the place again. How do I get back to that one that I did that was so tranquil? And what I tell them is that you're asking the wrong question, because, that's where I'll show the metaphor of, like, if I were to go to the gym and hold a 10-pound barbell like this and just stand here like this, right, for 20 minutes, then not much is going to happen with this muscle, right? It's only when I let go and I bring it back. I let go and I bring it back. That's what strengthens this muscle. So while we are doing meditation or any kind of mindfulness work, it's never, ever, ever about don't let your attention wander off. It's actually let your attention wander, notice it wandering, and then bring it back. And that builds a strength of, what they call the muscle of mindfulness, right? Now, why that's so important, right, is that on Wednesday afternoon at 3:33, and as I'm driving home and I'm stuck in traffic, because I've spent this time noticing when I'm not paying attention and bringing myself back and that process, I notice in that moment, wow, I'm feeling tension in my body. I'm feeling myself not really in the space of loving kindness anymore for that SOB that just cut off and, just cut in front of me on this merge, And in that moment that I notice it, I can return back to the thing, whether that's just back to, okay, let me try to relax my body, or let me get back to my loving kindness. Let me get back to my compassion. Let me return to me. And so it is the awareness of knowing when I'm not me, the awareness of knowing that I'm not paying attention to the sound of my toothbrush that really is the key. The coming back is the easy part, It's the noticing where I'm at that is the key. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Because I can think of times when my energy feels off, and acknowledging that is the first step to then saying, okay, what can I do to bring my energy back to me and feel like this? And it could be in the form of breath work, or even taking a minute to do some meditation. And I want to add to your meditation piece too. I was just listening to a podcast, one of Jay Shetty's episodes.
Sure.
I love listening to him.
He's great.
And he was talking, he was talking about how when he was a monk, he and his monk teacher and several other monks got on a train to travel to another location. Well, he refused to meditate on the train. He would always get off the train and go find when the train would stop, of course it would stop, and he would get off and go sit somewhere, meditate, and come back. And one of the monk teachers asked him about that. And he was like, well, because it's quieter. It's very loud on the train. And the monk teacher said, you need to learn how to meditate on a train, because that is true meditation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's very much connected to what I'm talking about, right? Absolutely. Because again, it's not that you, and one of the things I always tell my clients is that, one of the first aha moments in this process is going to be you realizing that there's really no such thing as a quiet place.
No.
There's always something that's going to be able to distract us. But again, those distractions are a gift. Ram Dass would say those distractions are God and drag. They are bringing you closer to the thing you're seeking through this practice. And that goes into the judging that we talked about, right? So a lot of people think of judgment, and certainly judgment is part of saying this is good or this is bad. And I often illustrate this with a traffic jam, right? You ask anybody in any country, any city in the world, is traffic good or bad? Everybody's going to say traffic's bad. It sucks. It's, whatever. But think of it this way, right? If you have one person in a traffic jam who is on the way to, they're supposed to see their daughter's piano recital, right? And they're stuck in this traffic jam and they're going to miss it. There is no worse feeling. They're banging their dashboard. They're saying, why did I pick this route? How did I wind up here? Oh my gosh, this is the worst thing in the world, right? Okay, fine. That probably happens in just about every single traffic jam. But imagine the car next to him is a family who is driving to an airport where the father is going to get on a plane and, he's enlisted in the army. He's going to be gone for a year. And his 4-year-old daughter is in the back seat, and he's not going to see her for a whole year. This traffic, oh my gosh, I just got an extra half hour with my daughter. This traffic is wonderful. It's beautiful. So therefore, it's neither good nor bad. It's just what it is, But now judgment goes even a little further than that, right? Judgment, in my opinion, and not just my opinion, but it's about like sort of editorializing our experiences, right? It's like, it's the opinions. It's the thing, I don't like the way that person's hair looks. And again, that goes back to like the sunset. Like if you ever sat next to somebody, at a sunset and they said, well, if only that one cloud wasn't there, you'd be like, what the heck is wrong with you? It's a beautiful sunset, But that's the way we're walking around our whole lives. Like, if only this wasn't that way, I might be happy. If only this wasn't that way, it might be happy. That's all part of judgment, the judging mind. And so therefore, it's noticing that. It's noticing, man, I am like feeling a certain way about this person and I'm judging them. I'm opining. Let me back out of that. Let me come back to just actively listening to them, to just being with them. And it's just a continual process of veering and returning, veering and returning, veering and returning our whole lives. That's it. That's the whole game.
It is. And it's so beautiful when you can walk through the world that way. I've noticed a big shift in how I approach life and even how people respond to me, because I've shifted, like through my yoga practice and other things I've been doing. I've shifted and it's beautiful and people are starting to recognize that. And I imagine it's the same for the people that you help through Alicia's Angels. I mean, you said it. Absolutely. They're shifting and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll borrow from another of my favorite authors, teachers, people. Jack Kornfield talks about in his book, The Wise Heart. He talks about, he says, if you were to go into a violin store, right, there's going to be violins hanging on the wall there. Right. And if you were to walk up to one of those violins and sort of run your fingernail, across the strings, that violin is going to sound. But if you're listening carefully enough, you'll recognize that the violins on either side of it that you didn't touch are also going to sound. That's resonance. And that's what's happening to you and me. Right? What am I resonating? What is that energy that I'm putting out there? Is it an energy of loving kindness and presence and curiosity and listening to understand and loving every single person that I come across? Or is it something different from that?
Oh, I love this. I could talk forever, but I want to get to my final question. I'll have to have you back because this is just, I love this.
I would love it.
Good. Then we'll make it happen.
Awesome. Because this is turning into an epic podcast here.
It really is. And I think about all the people who think, I appreciate you. And I think of the people who listen, and I've received feedback on stuff, and someone recently, she was like, I like the ones where you get a little woo-woo.
Oh, well, cool. They're going to love this.
Yes, they are. And like, to me, this is not woo-woo, but to the rest of the world, it could be considered that.
Right.
It's neuroscience. Like you said, it's scientifically proven that we can do this and adjust our minds and our thinking and how we walk in this world. And
even that resonance is also scientifically seen. Like, things like the vagus nerve, we understand now is there's a resonance between us. We've known for many years that if two people are talking, they're going to start mimicking each other's body language and gestures. Couples who have been together for decades, they tend to start resembling each other. And the reason for that is that as you and I are talking, we're, unconsciously, we're, mimicking each other's expressions. And we're doing that to see, are you safe? Can I trust you? Am I okay here? We're doing it all the time. Now we understand that even as we're talking here, our heart rates are going to sync up to each other. This is not woo-woo at all. It's there. It's real.
It is very real, and I very much feel it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's about the awareness of feeling it as it's happening, because it's been happening the whole time. You just didn't feel it before. You just weren't aware of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Closing question. When everything external falls away, like our titles and our labels, who are you, Art, at your core?
That's a beautiful question. That is really such a beautiful question. I'm afraid to answer the truthful answer because I feel like it's going to sound like disingenuous, but when everything is stripped away, I am love. And that is genuine. It is absolutely true. I see squirrels on the street and I want to spend, I try to connect with them. I feel, I live from my heart. And so when it's all stripped away, what I am is love. And love
is beautiful.
And it can come across many different ways, so.
It really can. And you can tell that too by the work that you do. You don't have to do what you're doing.
No.
You're choosing to do this and you're changing lives and you're sharing love and you're spreading love through Alicia's Angels. And I went to your other website, and everything that you do is sharing love.
Thank you so much.
You are love. Yeah.
I feel seen. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your love and your passion and the work that you do in this world. And I'm going to do a little subtle, hey, Dad, you should check this out.
Please. He's more than welcome, Yes. And, we host our sessions a few times a week. And I'm also, please, you have my email address. Have him send me an email if he has any questions about it. As you can probably tell, I kind of enjoy talking about this stuff. So I would welcome the opportunity. But yeah. And again, it's not, it's not just about like, okay, if you do this, this is going to happen. It's like, you're going to feel this connection. You're going to feel part of a community that's, even if it's just you and me, right? There's going to be something that you feel like, man, I'm not alone in this,
Yeah.
Because again, even some people who are sleeping right next to somebody, they feel alone because that other person doesn't, they don't feel connected. They don't feel that resonance,
And that connection is so important. And then we could go talk about that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe for the next podcast.
Part 2. Yeah, there we go.
Well, Art, thank you so very much for joining me
Steph.
for this episode.
Thank you.
And
Steph.
yeah, you are so welcome. And we'll have you back. I'm glad that we found each other. This is it's the universe. The universe puts people in our lives, and this happened.
You just got to be open to it,
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all of you for watching and listening, and we'll be back again next week.
And Trixie says thank you too.
Oh, hi, Trixie. Oh, she's so cute.